By my title and honour, that girl is not my daughter, the Duke of Blackmere swore before Parliament. 6-year-old Rose looked up at him, untied the faded blue ribbon from her wrist, and placed it silently at his feet. Lady Eleanor's heart broke, but she did not kneel to retrieve it. Her husband had ignored her letters, refused a private hearing, and chosen ambition over the child, who still called him Papa. If Parliament accepted his petition, Eleanor would be expelled from Blackmere House, while Rose would lose her inheritance and be placed under Lord Ashcombe's control. Then the Duke stepped on the ribbon. A tiny silver clasp snapped beneath his boot, revealing a strip of writing concealed inside the embroidery. Eleanor recognized the handwriting immediately, but Lord Ashcombe recognized it too. His face drained of color as he moved toward the child. The message contained only 7 words, and the first 4 were, "If Blackmere denies this child." Ashcombe's hand closed around the loose end of the ribbon. Eleanor seized his wrist before he could pull it away. A murmur swept through the chamber. Lords leaned forward on the red benches. At the centre table, the parliamentary clerk lifted his pen, but did not write. "Release me," Ashcombe whispered. "Release my daughter's ribbon." His fingers tightened. Eleanor could feel him trembling beneath his embroidered cuff. "Lady Blackmere," the presiding Lord Chancellor warned, "you will observe the dignity of this chamber." Eleanor did not look away from Ashcombe. Then the chamber should observe a man attempting to remove evidence from a child. That word changed the room. Evidence. Ashcombe released the ribbon at once, but one corner of the hidden strip remained trapped beneath his thumb. When he pulled back, the old paper tore. Rose flinched. The Duke finally moved. Nathaniel Blackmere descended from the witness position, his face rigid beneath the chamber's candlelight. For one terrible instant, Eleanor remembered the man who had carried their feverish infant through the corridors all night, because she would sleep only against his chest. That man stopped several feet from Rose. "Give the ribbon to the clerk," he said. Not to Eleanor, not to his daughter, to the clerk. Rose pressed herself against Eleanor's skirts. Eleanor retrieved both pieces of paper. The larger fragment carried the unfinished warning. The smaller piece contained only a dark sweep of ink and the edge of what might have been a name. She placed them on the table herself. The clerk reached for them, but Eleanor covered the fragments with her palm. "I want their condition recorded first." Ashcombe's mouth tightened. "Another delay." "No," Eleanor said. A chain of custody. Several men exchanged surprised glances. They had expected a humiliated wife, perhaps a weeping mother. They had forgotten that Eleanor had spent 12 years maintaining Blackmere's parish registers, tenant rolls, and family correspondence, while her husband pursued influence in London. She knew how records disappeared. She also knew how dishonest men later claimed they had never existed. The clerk documented the broken clasp, the torn paper, and the black thread along the ribbon's inner seam. Only then did Eleanor lift her hand. Nathaniel stared at the concealed message. "Did you know it was there?" he asked. The question was directed at her, but his gaze rested on Ashcombe. "No." "Convenient," Ashcombe said. "A secret note appears at the very moment her deception is exposed." Eleanor looked at her husband. "You received my request to have the ribbon examined privately." Nathaniel's jaw shifted. "I received many requests, and refused every one. I refused to let sentiment replace fact. You refused to look at anything that might complicate your decision." A shocked silence followed. No duchess spoke to her husband in that manner before Parliament, especially not a duchess accused of adultery and fraud. Nathaniel's eyes hardened, but he did not deny it. 3 months earlier, Ashcombe had brought him a physician's statement claiming that an illness suffered during Nathaniel's military service had left him incapable of fathering a child. A second document alleged that Eleanor had met another man in secret during the months before Rose's birth. Nathaniel had confronted her with neither document. He had simply removed Rose's miniature from his desk and left Blackmere for London. Eleanor had written 17 letters. He had opened only one. Now a parliamentary officer approached with a sealed order. "Lady Blackmere, pending the judgment of this inquiry, His Grace has requested that you surrender the keys to Blackmere House, the nursery, and the family archive." Rose's small hand tightened around Eleanor's fingers. "And my daughter?" Eleanor asked. The officer hesitated. Ashcombe answered for him. "The child will remain in neutral custody until her parentage is determined." "Whose custody?" "Mine." Rose made a frightened sound. Eleanor turned toward Nathaniel. You agreed to this? His face betrayed the briefest hesitation. It was the moment she had prayed for, the instant when he might finally look at Rose and remember every night he had called her his little star. Ashcombe stepped beside him. The vote cannot proceed unless the child is protected from influence. Nathaniel looked at Eleanor, then at the watching lords. His ambition won. I signed the order this morning. Something inside Eleanor became still. She released the hope she had carried into the chamber. She would no longer spend her strength persuading her husband to remember who she was. From that moment forward, she would protect Rose from what he had willingly become. No, Eleanor said. The officer blinked. My lady, I will surrender the house keys. I will surrender the archive keys. But no one will take my daughter without a lawful order naming the grounds, the guardian, and the place of confinement. Ashcombe smiled. You have no authority here. Then why? Eleanor asked. Were you trying to steal a message you claim is meaningless? His smile vanished. At the table, the clerk carefully aligned the torn pieces beneath a glass weight. The final words could not be read, but a small mark had appeared beside the ripped edge. 3 silver stars pressed into the paper. The same 3 stars embroidered on Rose's ribbon. Eleanor had seen that mark once before. It was not a family crest. It belonged to the private seal of Rose's godmother, the late Countess of Wycliffe, the woman Ashcombe claimed had never attended the baptism. The clerk looked up. This paper must be compared with the original chapel register. A messenger entered before anyone could respond. He crossed the chamber and whispered into the clerk's ear. The man's face changed. The chapel register cannot be produced, he announced. Blackmere Chapel was broken into before dawn. The baptism pages were cut from the book. Eleanor looked toward Ashcombe. He appeared relieved. That was when she understood. The accusation against Rose was not merely designed to punish an unwanted wife or secure a political alliance. Someone needed her daughter declared illegitimate before Parliament adjourned, and whatever remained inside that ribbon could stop them. Someone needed Rose declared illegitimate before Parliament adjourned, and whatever remained inside that ribbon could stop them. Eleanor turned to the parliamentary clerk. Seal the ribbon and both fragments in my presence. Ashcombe gave a contemptuous laugh. The wife accused of falsifying records now instructs Parliament on evidence. The wife accused of falsifying records is the only person in this chamber who noticed that you tried to remove it. The clerk looked toward the Lord Chancellor. After a brief nod from the high bench, he folded the ribbon and torn message inside a sheet of clean paper. He secured it with Parliament's seal, recorded the time, and invited Eleanor and Nathaniel to sign across the fold. Ashcombe stepped forward. You will not sign, Eleanor said. I am the Duke's nearest male relation, and the man who tried to take the ribbon. Nathaniel's eyes shifted between them. Eleanor, enough. No. You may distrust me if that is what you have chosen, but I will not permit him to touch another object connected to Rose. The force in her voice made Nathaniel pause. Years earlier, that same voice had stopped an angry crowd outside the Blackmere grain house when a steward's error left 3 villages without flour. Eleanor had stood on a cart in the rain, read the delivery figures aloud, and promised that every family would receive its proper share before nightfall. She had kept that promise. Nathaniel had once called her the steadiest heart in Blackmere. Now he would not meet her eyes. The clerk placed the sealed packet inside a locked evidence case. It will remain under parliamentary custody. Only then did Eleanor release her breath. A small committee room had been assigned to her while the Lords considered Ashcombe's request for temporary guardianship. Its windows were barred, and an officer remained outside the door. It was not formally a prison, but the meaning was plain. Rose sat on a wooden bench, staring at her bare wrist. Eleanor knelt before her. Are you cold? The child shook her head. Hungry? Another shake. After a long silence, Rose whispered, Did Papa mean it? Eleanor had faced dishonest stewards, starving tenants, and noblemen who assumed a woman could not understand a ledger. None of them had ever frightened her as much as that question. She took Rose's hands. Your father said something cruel, because he has chosen to believe cruel people. But did he mean it? Eleanor could not purchase her daughter's comfort with another lie. He meant to say it before those men. That is enough for us to protect ourselves. Rose's lower lip trembled. If I am not his daughter, am I still yours? You are mine before every lord in England, before every court, and before God. Rose threw her arms around Eleanor's neck. Eleanor held her tightly, allowing herself only 3 silent tears before footsteps approached the door. The parliamentary clerk entered, carrying a stack of copied documents. My lady, I thought you should see what will be used against you. He placed the physician's statement and 2 alleged extracts from the baptism register on the table. His decision was dangerous. If Ashcombe learned that he had shown Eleanor the papers before the hearing resumed, the clerk could lose his position. Why are you helping me? She asked. I am helping the record, he replied. You were the only person in that chamber who cared whether it remained intact. He had valued her judgment before knowing whether it might serve him. Eleanor remembered that. She examined the physician's statement first. Nathaniel had been declared incapable of fathering children after a severe fever during his military service. The document appeared convincing until Eleanor reached its final line. Examination conducted on the 14th day of March, 1809. Rose had been conceived almost 2 years before that examination. The report could suggest Nathaniel was infertile in 1809. It could not prove he had been infertile in 1807. Did my husband read this? Eleanor asked. He signed beneath it, but did he read it? The clerk hesitated. Lord Ashcombe summarized the contents before his grace signed. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. Nathaniel had not merely been deceived. He had accepted humiliation as evidence because it supported the future he now wanted: a place in the royal ministry, secured through Ashcombe's political allies, and freed from the inconvenient wife who questioned their plans. She turned to the copied baptism extract. Her own supposed signature was good. The slant, spacing, and final flourish had been imitated with care. But Eleanor had learned record-keeping from her father, a clergyman who believed one misplaced date could rob a widow of a pension or a child of a lawful name. Since girlhood, she had written every date in the same order: day, month, year. The false extract listed month, day, year. This was copied from an American commercial hand, she said. The clerk leaned closer. Could that establish forgery? Not alone. A habit is not proof. She compared the 2 extracts. On the first, Rose was supposedly baptized on May 18. On the second, a witness claimed Eleanor brought an unnamed infant to the chapel on May 20 and ordered the register altered. Eleanor's finger stopped beneath the dates. That is impossible. Why? Blackmere Chapel was closed from May 17th until May 23rd. The clerk frowned. For what reason? The bell tower was struck by lightning. Stones fell through the vestry roof. Every service was moved to the west schoolroom. Are there repair accounts? There were. In the family archive. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. They were none some more. They were. The archive whose keys Nathaniel had just ordered her to surrender. A knock sounded outside. Before Eleanor could respond, the officer entered and held out a formal receipt. The archive keys were delivered to Lord Ashcombe 10 minutes ago. Eleanor rose so quickly that her chair scraped backward. My husband's order transferred the keys to Parliament. The Duke amended the instruction. Lord Ashcombe now holds temporary authority over all Blackmere records. The consequence of Nathaniel's choice struck with perfect clarity. By rejecting his wife and granting Ashcombe control, he had placed every document capable of defending Rose into the hands of the man who needed those documents destroyed. Eleanor faced the clerk. Send someone to Blackmere House, immediately, for the repair accounts. For anyone still loyal enough to stop a fire. The words had barely left her mouth when church bells began ringing beyond the parliamentary windows, not in celebration, but in alarm. A guard opened the door and shouted down the corridor. Fire at Blackmere House. The family archive is burning. Eleanor reached the corridor before the guard finished speaking. Rose ran beside her. One hand clenched around her mother's skirt. At the stairwell, Nathaniel emerged from the chamber with Ashcombe close behind him. Where are you going? The Duke demanded. To save what remains of our daughter's name. The house is under parliamentary restriction. Then arrest me when I return. Nathaniel caught her arm before she reached the entrance. The roads are crowded. The fire may have spread. And Rose cannot be taken into danger. Eleanor looked down at his hand. Once, his touch had meant safety. Now it carried only the authority he believed he still possessed. You signed her into Ashcombe's custody, she said. There is nowhere more dangerous for her than here. Ashcombe stepped closer. If you allow her to dictate events now, the Lords will see that you cannot govern your own household. Nathaniel released Eleanor. My carriage will take us, he said. You will remain under my supervision. Eleanor understood his choice. He was going because the burning records threatened him, not because Rose needed the truth. Smoke darkened the sky above Blackmere House. Servants formed a line across the courtyard, passing buckets toward the burning east wing. The flames had not begun near a chimney, bedroom, or kitchen. They poured from the archive windows alone. Eleanor placed Rose in the housekeeper's care. Take her to the west garden. Do not let anyone move her unless I come myself. Rose caught her sleeve. You promised I could stay beside you, and I intend to return. But first, I need you to protect something. Eleanor removed a brass button from her cuff and closed it inside Rose's hand. Do not lose this. Rose nodded. Eleanor wrapped a wet cloth over her mouth and entered the smoke. Inside the archive, the stone cabinet stood open. The ledgers had already been removed. Beneath it lay the broken handle of a document knife, with black sealing wax trapped inside its cracked wood. Eleanor slipped it into her pocket. A section of the ceiling collapsed behind her. Nathaniel seized the back of her gown and dragged her into the corridor. Have you lost your senses? He demanded. The stone cabinet was emptied before the fire. Ashcombe appeared behind them. Or she emptied it herself and returned for whatever she overlooked. Eleanor faced him. How did you know the stone cabinet was open? Ashcombe went silent. The cabinet was installed last winter, she continued, while you were in Vienna. A young maid then admitted that she had seen two unfamiliar men carrying a trunk from the archive passage. They wore Blackmere livery, but one had fastened his coat incorrectly. Eleanor remembered the brass button she had placed in Rose's hand. It had fallen from one of those false uniforms. Ashcombe immediately ordered the maid dismissed. If she leaves, Rose and I leave with her, Eleanor said. Nathaniel stared at his wife. You have nowhere to go. Then Parliament may find the sight of your wife and daughter sleeping in the street extremely instructive. At that moment, a groom arrived with an empty envelope recovered near the departing trunk. 3 silver stars had been pressed into its black wax. Inside the flap were an address and a time. Wycliffe House. Midnight. Ashcombe looked at Eleanor differently now. He no longer saw a humiliated wife begging to be believed. He saw the only person capable of following the trail he had failed to destroy. Eleanor folded the envelope and slipped it into her pocket. We are going to Wycliffe House. You are going nowhere, Ashcombe said. The address may be a trap. Then you should be delighted to let me walk into it. Nathaniel ordered the carriage prepared, but Eleanor refused to leave until the young maid was protected. Ashcombe had already dismissed her and threatened to report her for theft if she repeated what she had seen. Eleanor removed the pearl brooch from her gown and handed it to the housekeeper. Sell this if necessary. Take the girl and Rose to your sister's home. Use no Blackmere carriage, and tell no one where you are going. Nathaniel stared at the empty place on Eleanor's collar. The brooch had been his wedding gift. You would sell that for a servant? I would sell it for a witness you allowed your cousin to threaten. Rose hugged her mother before leaving with the 2 women. Eleanor waited until their hired coach disappeared into the smoke before entering Nathaniel's carriage. Ashcombe attempted to join them, but Nathaniel stopped him. Remain here and account for every person who entered the archive. It was a small decision, made too late, yet Ashcombe's face hardened as the carriage departed without him. Wycliffe House had stood empty since the Countess's death 3 years earlier. Its windows were shuttered, its iron gates chained, and a notice on the door declared the property scheduled for seizure over unpaid taxes. Eleanor examined the notice without touching it. The seal appeared genuine, but the tax figure was impossible. The Countess had placed the house in trust for Rose on the day of the child's baptism. Its expenses had always been paid from a separate annuity administered through Blackmere's parish office. How do you know? Nathaniel asked. Because I prepared the payments every quarter. The estate steward handled the accounts. He signed them. I found the missing invoices, corrected the figures, and ensured the money arrived. Nathaniel's expression shifted. For years, reports had reached him bearing another man's signature. He had never asked who prevented the mistakes concealed beneath it. Eleanor removed a hairpin and opened the garden gate through a weak link she remembered from previous visits. Inside, Dead vines covered the path, but fresh wheel marks cut through the mud toward the servants' entrance. Someone had used the supposedly abandoned house that morning. The door had been forced and then carefully closed. Eleanor found 2 empty oil tins in the pantry, identical to those used to start the archive fire. In the drawing room, papers lay scattered across the carpet beside a cold fireplace. Most were harmless household bills, placed there to suggest a hurried search. Eleanor ignored them and studied the room itself. One portrait was missing from the wall, leaving a pale rectangle in the faded silk. The Countess's portrait hung there, she said. Nathaniel remembered it. She hated that painting. She hated being painted, not the frame. Eleanor crossed to a packing crate near the window. It contained the portrait, but its carved walnut frame had been removed. She searched beneath the canvas and found 3 tiny silver stars marked along the stretcher. The same sign appeared again, leading not to the picture, but to the frame that someone had taken. A floorboard creaked above them. Nathaniel motioned for Eleanor to remain behind him and climbed the stairs. She followed anyway. They found an elderly former footman in the nursery, bleeding from a wound above his ear. He had served the Countess for 30 years and had come after receiving a note ordering him to remove an item hidden in the portrait frame. 2 men in false Blackmere livery had arrived first. They took the frame, struck him, and demanded to know where the Countess kept her private correspondence. "Who sent your note?" Eleanor asked. The footman produced it from his coat. The message bore Eleanor's copied signature. Nathaniel read it twice. "This makes you responsible for bringing him here, or someone wanted him found injured beside a letter carrying my name." Eleanor cleaned the wound with water from her flask. The footman's breathing was shallow, and one pupil reacted more slowly than the other. Moving him carelessly could kill him. Nathaniel wanted to summon his own physician, but Eleanor refused. The physician who had signed the false infertility statement worked under Ashcombe's patronage. Instead, she sent the carriage driver to bring a surgeon known to the former footman. The delay placed Eleanor at risk. Parliament had ordered her to remain under supervision, and the inquiry would resume within 2 hours. Leaving now might save her legal position. Staying could save the witness's life. She stayed. When the surgeon arrived, he confirmed that moving the man earlier would probably have proved fatal. Nathaniel heard every word, yet by the time they returned to Parliament, Ashcombe had already reshaped the story. He announced that Eleanor had led the Duke to Wycliffe House, where a loyal servant was discovered after being attacked while answering her forged letter. He claimed she had burned the archive, removed the portrait frame, and invented the men in false livery to hide her involvement. The Lords received Nathaniel's account differently. They praised him for discovering Wycliffe House and rescuing the injured servant. Eleanor's reasoning, her knowledge of the trust, and her decision to summon the right surgeon vanished from the official summary. Ashcombe had stolen her success and turned its remaining edges against her. Then he produced a new petition, demanding Rose's immediate removal from Eleanor's care. "The Duchess has now endangered a servant, destroyed family records, and fled parliamentary supervision," he declared. "The child cannot remain with her another hour." Eleanor looked at Nathaniel. "Tell them about the oil tins. Tell them about the missing frame. Tell them the footman was alive because I refused to move him." Nathaniel stood between his wife and the political allies who had promised him a ministry. He had one clean opportunity to demand that the evidence be examined before Rose was taken away. The Lord Chancellor placed the guardianship order before him. "Your Grace, do you support Lord Ashcombe's petition?" Nathaniel looked down at the blank line, waiting for his signature. Nathaniel looked down at the blank line, waiting for his signature. Eleanor said nothing more. If he required another plea before defending the child he had raised for 6 years, then no words could restore the man she had married. Nathaniel dipped the pen into the inkwell. His hand paused above the page. "The order is temporary," he said, almost as if he were asking Eleanor to excuse him, "until the evidence is examined. A temporary betrayal still teaches a child who abandoned her." Pain crossed his face, but Ashcombe leaned close and murmured that withdrawing now would be interpreted as an admission of weakness. Nathaniel signed. The scratch of the pen was softer than Rose's cry when 2 parliamentary officers entered through the side door. The housekeeper followed them, struggling against a 3rd officer. Someone had traced the hired coach before it reached her sister's home. Rose ran to Eleanor, but the men blocked her. "Mama!" Eleanor moved forward. A guard caught her arms while Ashcombe knelt before the child with a performance of tenderness. "You will be perfectly safe with me." Rose struck him across the face. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Ashcombe rose slowly, a red mark forming along his cheek. "Take her to Blackmere's northern residence." "That house has been closed for years," Eleanor said. "It has no nursery and almost no servants. Then I shall appoint suitable attendants." "Where is the written address in the order?" The officers hesitated. The document granted Ashcombe temporary guardianship, but did not specify where Rose must be kept. Eleanor looked toward the clerk, who had helped her earlier. "Record that Lord Ashcombe intends to remove the child to an unstaffed residence outside London." The clerk lowered his eyes. "I have been relieved of my duties, my lady." A different clerk now sat at the table, one who wore Ashcombe's political colours beneath his black coat. The loyal clerk had been dismissed while Eleanor was at Wycliffe House. Another frightened man had failed her because Nathaniel's signature had made resistance dangerous. Eleanor pulled free of the guard and knelt before Rose. "Listen to me. Keep the brass button. Do not show it to anyone. Remember what I told you. You are mine before every court and before God." Rose clung to her neck. "Come with me. I will find you. Promise?" "I promise." Ashcombe separated them. Nathaniel flinched when Rose called for him, but he did not withdraw the order. He watched his daughter carried from the chamber, while his name gave legal force to the act. Eleanor remained on her knees until the doors closed. Something final passed through her, not despair, but release. She no longer wanted to save Nathaniel's reputation, his ministry, or their marriage. She wanted her daughter returned, the truth recorded, and every person who had used Rose's name held accountable. When she rose, her voice was steady. "I request the exact destination of the child placed in Lord Ashcombe's custody." The new clerk answered, without looking at her. "The guardian may determine the residence, then record my objection. The inquiry has been suspended until tomorrow. Record it now." Ashcombe smiled. "You no longer command a parish office, Eleanor, and you are not yet beyond the reach of its records." His smile faded. Nathaniel approached after the chamber began to empty. "Rose will be guarded. I will visit her tonight. You do not know where he is taking her. Ashcombe will tell me, as he told you what was in the physician's report, as he told you how he knew the stone cabinet was open. I am trying to prevent a scandal from destroying all of us. No, you are sacrificing the smallest person in this family, so powerful men will continue to admire you." He recoiled. Eleanor removed her wedding ring. For a moment, Nathaniel seemed to believe she would return it. Instead, she closed it inside her hand. "This bought my silence for too long. Now it will buy a carriage." She walked away before he could answer. Outside Parliament, the dismissed clerk waited beneath the portico. He had copied one line from the original guardianship order before surrendering his position. Ashcombe had requested authority not only over Rose, but over all private property held in trust for her. Wycliffe House was one such property. 2 farms, a parish school, and a modest shipping investment were others. If Rose were declared illegitimate, those assets would not pass automatically to Nathaniel. Under the Countess's trust, they would revert to the alternate trustee. "Lord Ashcombe," Eleanor said. The clerk nodded. The accusation was not merely intended to secure Nathaniel's title. Ashcombe meant to acquire Rose's independent property before Parliament discovered how the trust had been altered. Eleanor hired a carriage with her wedding ring and went first to the parish office rather than chase the northern road. Ashcombe expected a desperate mother to follow her child blindly. Eleanor would find the legal mechanism that made taking Rose necessary. At the office, she discovered the door broken, the shelves emptied, and the parish assistant bound inside the record room. She freed him, but he could barely speak. 2 men had taken the trust copies and every document bearing the Countess's seal. They had also demanded the schedule of ships connected to Rose's investment. "Which ship?" Eleanor asked. "The Mercy Bell," he whispered. "It sails at dawn." Eleanor knew the vessel. The Countess had used it to carry grain during the winter shortages. Its captain was loyal to the Wycliffe Trust, not to Blackmere. If it departed with Rose aboard, Ashcombe could remove the child beyond the immediate reach of Parliament, while claiming she was merely residing at the northern estate. The parish assistant gripped Eleanor's sleeve. They asked how long a child could survive in the lower cargo hold. The guardianship order had not been designed to hide Rose for a night. It had given Ashcombe the authority he needed to make her disappear before the next hearing. The guardianship order had not been designed to hide Rose for a night. It had given Ashcombe the authority he needed to make her disappear before the next hearing. Eleanor sent the dismissed clerk to Parliament with a written warning, then hired the fastest carriage remaining near the parish office. The Mercy Bell lay at the eastern docks, 40 minutes away if the streets remained clear. They did not. A line of grain wagons blocked the river road, each bearing Blackmere's crest and an unfamiliar shipping mark beneath it. Drivers argued with dock workers who refused to unload without payment. Eleanor stepped from the carriage and examined the nearest invoice. The grain had been removed from the 2 farms held in Rose's trust and transferred to Ashcombe's private warehouse. Nathaniel's guardianship signature had allowed Ashcombe to present himself as controller of the child's property. He was stripping the trust before Rose's legitimacy could be defended. "Who authorized this price?" Eleanor asked the driver. "It was less than half the market value. Lord Ashcombe's agent." He said the Duke approved it. The grain was not merely being stolen. Ashcombe was creating false evidence that Rose's properties were insolvent, giving him grounds to sell them permanently as her guardian. Eleanor climbed onto the first wagon. Nothing moves until the original trust price is paid. A warehouse supervisor ordered her down. Eleanor took the invoice, turned it over, and wrote a notice, declaring the transfer disputed before parliamentary inquiry. Her father had taught her that a clear objection, witnessed and delivered before a sale, could prevent an unscrupulous buyer from later claiming ignorance. She made every driver sign as a witness and sent 1 copy to the harbour magistrate. It would not defeat Ashcombe, but it would slow him. "You are delaying your daughter's rescue," the supervisor sneered. "I am preventing 200 families from losing the harvest that feeds them while I rescue her." Eleanor could have abandoned the wagons and run to the ship. Instead, she protected the tenants whose livelihoods Ashcombe was stealing under Nathaniel's authority. 10 precious minutes passed before the grain convoy turned away from the warehouse. When Eleanor reached the quay, the Mercy Bell had already left its berth. Its sails were moving toward the open river. For one brief moment, Rose appeared behind the stern window. She struck the glass with both hands. "Mama." Her voice could not cross the water, but Eleanor saw the shape of the word. Nathaniel arrived on a lathered horse. "Where is she?" Eleanor pointed toward the departing ship. Nathaniel ordered the harbour master to stop it. The man refused. The Mercy Bell carried valid departure papers bearing Nathaniel's seal and the guardianship order he had signed. "Then I revoke it," Nathaniel said. "You cannot revoke a parliamentary order at the docks, Your Grace." For the first time, Nathaniel's title could not save him. His own signature had placed Rose beyond his authority. Smoke began rising through the ship's lower cargo vents. Eleanor seized the harbour master's signal flag. Years earlier, she had taught Rose a river code as a game. 3 short drops. 1 long, 2 short. It meant, "Find the smallest door." Eleanor sent the signal. Far across the water, Rose's face appeared behind the glass. Then she disappeared. Moments later, the stern door burst open. Rose crawled onto the deck, coughing. A sailor reached for her. She ducked beneath his arm, climbed through the railing, and jumped. Eleanor screamed. The harbour cutter reached Rose seconds later and pulled her from the river. Nathaniel fell to his knees on the quay. Rose was alive. But as Eleanor wrapped her inside her cloak, the child whispered. There was another child below. When Eleanor reached the quay, the Mercy Bell had already left its berth. Its sails moved between the masts toward the open river. Rose was visible for one instant at the stern window, striking the glass with both hands. "Mama!" Her cry could not cross the water, but Eleanor saw the shape of it. She ran along the quay until a row of warehouses blocked her path. Nathaniel arrived behind her on a lathered horse. "Where is she?" Eleanor pointed toward the retreating ship. He shouted for the harbour master to stop it, invoking his title and demanding that the river chain be raised. The harbour master refused. The Mercy Bell carried valid departure papers bearing Nathaniel's own seal and a guardianship order signed by him before Parliament. "Then I revoke it," Nathaniel said. "You cannot revoke a parliamentary order at the docks, Your Grace." For the first time, Nathaniel's power failed him completely. His title could not undo the authority he had voluntarily handed to Ashcombe. He seized the harbour master by the coat, but Eleanor pulled him back. If you have him arrested, we lose the only man who can legally delay that vessel. Nathaniel released him. What do you need? The harbour master explained that the ship could be detained only for unsafe cargo, unpaid duties, or a credible threat to life. Eleanor remembered the grain wagons and the schedule stolen from the parish office. Ashcombe had planned to load Rose's grain onto the Mercy Bell, sell it abroad, and remove the child on the same voyage. But Eleanor had stopped the wagons. The ship's departure manifest still listed 400 sacks that were not aboard. A ship leaving with a knowingly false cargo declaration could be recalled for inspection. Eleanor handed over the disputed invoice. The harbour master read it and signalled the river station. A red flag climbed the mast, ordering the Mercy Bell to return. The ship did not turn. Instead, it increased sail. They are refusing inspection, Nathaniel said, because Rose is aboard. A harbour cutter launched in pursuit, but the Mercy Bell had the stronger wind. Eleanor studied the vessel through the harbour master's glass. Smoke rose from its lower stern, not from the chimney of the galley, but through the cargo vents. Someone had started a fire below deck. Panic spread across the quay as sailors shouted that the ship might ignite before the cutter reached it. Nathaniel went white. Ashcombe would not burn the vessel with Rose aboard. He asked how long a child could survive in the lower hold. Eleanor watched the smoke and forced herself to think as the parish keeper her father had trained. Not only as a terrified mother, the Mercy Bell's old plans had once been stored in the Wycliffe accounts. Its lower hold connected to the stern cabin through a narrow ventilation passage designed to keep grain dry. A small child might fit through it. Rose had the brass button, and the button's sharp soldered edge could cut thin rope if she understood how to use it. She is not helpless, Eleanor whispered. What? Rose listens when adults think she is playing. Eleanor seized a signal flag and asked the harbour master for the childhood code used by river pilots. 3 short drops, 1 long, then 2 short. At home, Eleanor had taught Rose the pattern as a game, meaning, find the smallest door. She raised and lowered the flag from the quay. Far across the water, a tiny face appeared behind the stern glass. Rose saw the signal, then she disappeared. Nathaniel looked at Eleanor with raw disbelief. You taught her harbour code. I taught her how to survive people who mistake children for possessions. The smoke thickened. The harbour cutter drew closer, but the Mercy Bell approached the bend, where the river widened toward the sea. Then the stern cabin door burst open. Rose crawled onto the outer deck, coughing, the brass button clenched in her hand. A sailor reached for her. She ducked beneath his arm and squeezed through the railing. Eleanor screamed as her daughter jumped. The cutter crew pulled Rose from the river seconds later. Nathaniel fell to his knees on the quay. The Mercy Bell escaped around the bend, carrying the stolen portrait frame and whatever other evidence Ashcombe had loaded aboard. Rose was alive, but the Duke's reckoning had begun. News of the attempted removal spread before they returned to Parliament. His promised ministry was withdrawn. His political allies publicly denied supporting him, and the Lords announced an inquiry into his use of guardianship authority. Nathaniel had sacrificed his wife and child to protect his standing. By sunset, he had lost that standing anyway. Rose shivered beneath Eleanor's cloak as the cutter reached shore. There was another child below, she whispered. A boy from the farms. He did not get out. Eleanor looked toward the open river. The Mercy Bell would reach the coastal junction before midnight, where Ashcombe could transfer its passengers and stolen records to another vessel. Saving Rose had revealed a larger crime, and they had less than 5 hours to stop the ship before the boy and the remaining proof disappeared into the darkness. Saving Rose had revealed a larger crime, and they had less than 5 hours to stop the ship before the boy and the remaining proof disappeared into the darkness. Eleanor refused Nathaniel's offer to take Rose back to Blackmere House. She brought her instead to the West Parish School, one of the properties protected by the Wycliffe Trust, and therefore outside the Duke's direct control. The schoolmistress locked the gates, lit a fire in her private room, and found dry clothes for Rose. For the first time that day, Eleanor allowed herself to stop moving. She knelt beside the hearth and wrapped both hands around a cup of tea she could not drink. Her fingers trembled so violently that the cup rattled against its saucer. Nathaniel stood across the room, soaked from the quay and silent. Rose slept beneath a wool blanket with her head in Eleanor's lap. I saw her jump, Eleanor whispered. For 1 second, I believed I had taught my child to leap to her death. Nathaniel crouched beside the hearth but did not touch her. You taught her how to escape, because the man who should have protected her signed her into danger. He lowered his head. Yes, it was the first admission he had made without qualification. No mention of deception, politics, or temporary orders followed it. Eleanor looked at the man she had once loved and saw genuine horror in his face, but remorse could not become another demand placed upon her. Do not mistake my allowing you into this room for forgiveness. I will not. And do not ask Rose to comfort you. His voice broke slightly. I will not. Eleanor set down the untouched tea. Then make yourself useful. Rose had heard sailors arguing before the fire began. One mentioned taking the Mercy Bell to Harrow Junction, while another insisted the tide would be too low. Eleanor knew the Wycliffe shipping schedules, but the archive copies had burned. The dismissed parliamentary clerk brought the only surviving departure manifest, copied before Ashcombe replaced him. Eleanor compared it with the false grain invoices and noticed the same shipping mark beneath both, a bell crossed by a narrow line. It was not a merchant symbol. It represented a shallow water route used by smaller barges. The Mercy Bell could not pass Harrow Junction fully loaded at low tide. Because Eleanor had stopped the grain wagons, however, the vessel sat higher in the water and could reach a private landing farther upriver. By protecting the tenant's harvest, she had unintentionally changed Ashcombe's escape route. Where is the private landing? Nathaniel asked. Eleanor remembered the 3 silver stars, the Countess's missing frame, and the annuity that maintained Wycliffe House. St. Aula's Mill. The mill belonged to the trust, but had been reported abandoned after flood damage. Eleanor had questioned those reports for months because the maintenance charges continued. Someone had been using the property and hiding the cost inside Rose's accounts. The schoolmistress offered to protect Rose, while the former maid arrived with the housekeeper and agreed to remain as a witness. Eleanor documented everyone's presence and placed copies of the grain protest, the shipping manifest, and Rose's statement in 3 separate envelopes. One went to Parliament, one to the harbour magistrate, and one stayed at the school. If Eleanor disappeared, Ashcombe could no longer erase the entire chain with a single fire. Nathaniel watched her seal the packets. Did you do this for all the Blackmere accounts? For 12 years. The drainage repairs, the winter grain, the tenants' petitions. Your stewards brought you the finished results. I corrected what they concealed. Why did you never tell me? Eleanor met his eyes. I did. You praised the men who repeated my words in deeper voices. He absorbed that without defending himself. When the hired horses arrived, Nathaniel offered to accompany her to St. Aula's Mill. Eleanor set her terms. You carry no authority over me. You will not negotiate with Ashcombe, destroy any document to protect your title, or remove Rose from the school. If I tell you to speak, you speak the whole truth. If I tell you to remain silent, you remain silent. Agreed. And if we find the boy, saving him comes before recovering your reputation. There is no reputation left worth placing before a child. She believed he meant it, but belief was no longer enough. They reached St. Aula's Mill shortly before 11. The ruined building stood beside a landing hidden by reeds. Fresh rope marks covered the mooring posts. Someone had arrived recently. Inside, Eleanor found the missing portrait frame resting on a flower table. Its backing had been cut open. The hidden compartment was empty. Beside it lay the blade of a document knife. Eleanor removed the broken handle from her pocket. The 2 pieces matched. Black wax filled both sides of the crack. This knife cut the baptism pages, she said, and opened the portrait frame. The dismissed clerk recorded the discovery before sealing both pieces separately. A weak knock sounded beneath the floor. They opened a trapdoor and found the missing farm boy inside the dry storage pit. Lord Ashcombe made me carry a leather case, he said, from Wycliffe House to the ship, then from the ship to this mill. Where is it now? The boy pointed toward the waterwheel chamber. An iron cash box hung above the mill race. Inside it lay the original declaration from Rose's baptism. Nathaniel stared at his own signature. I remember this. Eleanor looked at him. Then you always knew the private baptism occurred. I believed the declaration had been destroyed. You believed whatever allowed you to deny her. Before the clerk could seal the document, a bottle shattered through the window. Fire raced across the flower table. Ashcombe's voice came from the darkness outside. You were always clever, Eleanor. You simply never understood when to stop. A hooked pole shot through the broken window. It caught the cash box and dragged it into the mill race. The original declaration disappeared beneath the black water. They reached St. Aula's shortly before 11. The ruined mill stood beside a narrow landing hidden by reeds. No lamps showed in its broken windows, yet fresh rope marked the mooring posts. Eleanor and the dismissed clerk entered through the rear, while Nathaniel waited near the road with the harbour officers. Inside, they found the missing walnut portrait frame, resting on a flower table. Its backing had been cut away, revealing a narrow compartment. The compartment was empty. A faint rectangle of dust showed that it had once held a folded document. Near the frame lay the document knife with its handle missing. Eleanor removed the broken handle from her pocket. The pieces matched exactly, and black wax filled both sides of the crack. The knife had been used to cut the baptism pages, open the portrait backing, and perhaps tear the message inside Rose's ribbon. The clerk recorded the match, wrapped both pieces separately, and sealed them before witnesses. From beneath the floor came a weak knock. Eleanor found a trapdoor and discovered the missing farm boy locked in the mill's dry storage pit. He was frightened, but unharmed. He had been forced to carry a flat leather case from Wycliffe House to the Mersey Bell, then from the ship to the mill. He had seen Ashcombe remove a folded parchment bearing the Countess's 3-star seal. "Where did he take it?" Eleanor asked. The boy pointed toward the old water-wheel chamber. They found the parchment inside an iron cash box chained above the mill race. Eleanor did not open it. She called the clerk and 2 harbour officers to witness its position, record the chain, and cut the lock. Inside lay the original declaration signed at Rose's baptism. Nathaniel's signature appeared beneath the Countess's seal. It proved he had acknowledged Rose as his lawful daughter 6 years earlier. Nathaniel stared at his own handwriting. "I remember signing this. Then you always knew the private baptism occurred. I believed the paper had been destroyed after the formal ceremony." Eleanor's voice turned cold. "You believed whatever allowed you to deny her." Before the clerk could seal the declaration, glass shattered above them. A burning bottle struck the flower table. Fire raced across spilled oil, cutting Eleanor off from the exit. Through the broken window, Ashcombe's voice carried from the darkness. "You were always clever, Eleanor. You simply never understood that clever women should know when to stop." A hooked pole shot through the window, caught the open cash box, and dragged it into the mill race. The declaration vanished beneath the black water as flames climbed the walls around them. The declaration vanished beneath the black water as flames climbed the walls around them. Nathaniel threw his coat over the burning oil and shouted for the harbour officers. Eleanor pulled the farm boy toward the rear door, but a fallen beam blocked it. Smoke filled the mill faster than the archive, because flour dust burned through the air. The dismissed clerk tried to protect the sealed knife pieces beneath his coat. A second bottle shattered near his feet, and the blast knocked him against the wall. Eleanor saw the old grain chute above the storage pit. It opened toward the riverbank and was barely wide enough for a man. She pushed the boy inside first, then helped the injured clerk after him. Nathaniel lifted Eleanor toward the opening as the water-wheel chamber collapsed behind them. "Go," she ordered. "After you. This is not the moment to perform nobility. No. It is the moment to practice it." He held the burning beam long enough for Eleanor to climb into the chute, then followed as the floor gave way. They emerged beside the mill race, coughing and covered in soot. The boy was safe. The clerk still possessed one half of the broken knife, but the sealed handle had torn from his coat during the escape. The original baptism declaration, the cash box, and the matching piece of evidence were gone. Ashcombe had escaped before the harbour officers surrounded the mill. By morning, he had returned to Parliament first and presented himself as the victim. He claimed Eleanor had abducted a farm boy, stolen private trust papers, and set fire to St. Aula's mill when Nathaniel discovered her deception. His allies produced the charred handle of the document knife, allegedly recovered from Eleanor's belongings. Because the true custody seal had burned, Ashcombe could now argue that she had carried the complete knife all along. He also submitted a physician's statement declaring Eleanor emotionally unstable after years of concealing Rose's parentage. The chamber filled before sunrise. Eleanor entered in a borrowed dark gown, holding Rose's hand. Whispers followed them from the doors to the witness table. Ashcombe stood beneath the high windows, immaculate and composed. The farm boy's family had withdrawn his statement after their tenancy was threatened. The former maid had vanished from the parish school during the night. Even the schoolmistress received notice that the building would be seized unless she denied sheltering Eleanor. One by one, the people Eleanor had protected were being forced into silence. Ashcombe requested her confinement and permanent removal from Rose. His account was plausible because Nathaniel's signatures supported every stage of it. Transfer of the archive, guardianship of the child, control of the trust, and authority over the servants. The Duke had built the cage. Ashcombe had only closed it. The Lord Chancellor asked Nathaniel whether Eleanor had left parliamentary supervision, entered Wycliffe House, visited St. Aula's Mill, and handled objects later connected to the destroyed records. She did, Nathaniel answered. Ashcombe smiled. Then the facts are established. No, Nathaniel said. Only my failures are. The chamber fell silent. Nathaniel stepped away from his cousin and faced the assembled lords. I signed the guardianship order after refusing to read the dates in the physician's report. I transferred the archive to Lord Ashcombe after he attempted to seize the ribbon. I permitted my daughter to be taken without knowing where she would be held. I ignored 17 letters from my wife because answering them might have delayed the ministry I desired. Ashcombe's smile disappeared. Nathaniel continued. Lady Blackmere warned me that the evidence was false. I chose not to investigate because the accusation offered me political freedom from a wife whose judgment repeatedly exposed the weakness of my own. If she is guilty of anything, it is of preserving an estate whose duke preferred praise to truth. His confession destroyed the foundation of his promised office and exposed him to parliamentary censure. It also admitted that he had knowingly failed his family, but it did not prove Rose's legitimacy. Ashcombe recovered quickly. A remorseful husband is not a reliable witness. His Grace now invents conspiracy because he cannot bear the shame of discovering his wife's adultery. The Lord Chancellor agreed that Nathaniel's admission required investigation but could not replace the missing baptism record. Ashcombe then produced his strongest weapon, a formal statement from the former maid. It claimed Eleanor had ordered the archive emptied, supplied false livery, and promised payment in exchange for accusing Ashcombe. Eleanor read the signature and knew at once that the maid had not written it. Yet handwriting habits were still not decisive proof. Where is she? Eleanor asked. She left London after confessing, Ashcombe replied. Conveniently beyond questioning. She feared your retaliation. The chamber accepted enough of his explanation to continue. The guardianship of Rose remained in dispute. Eleanor's confinement appeared likely, and the Lords scheduled a final decision for noon. Ashcombe had seemingly won. Eleanor looked down at the objects allowed into evidence: the ribbon, the torn message, the charred knife handle, the half-blade saved by the clerk, the false baptism extracts, and the maid's statement. The original declaration was gone. Then she noticed black wax inside the crack of the handle Ashcombe had produced. At St. Aula's Mill, the matching blade had carried the same wax, but the knife used in Blackmere's parish office was never sealed with black wax. Parish wax was blue. The black wax belonged to Ashcombe's private correspondence. More importantly, the crack in the handle contained wax on both inner surfaces. The handle must already have been broken when it touched his seal. It could not have broken beneath the clerk's custody, as Ashcombe claimed. Eleanor looked at the ribbon. Its concealed message had also been resewn with black thread after someone opened it. Ashcombe's fatal flaw was not forgery. It was control. He needed to handle every object, tell every witness what to say, and personally explain every discovery. Somewhere within those explanations, he possessed knowledge no innocent man could have. Eleanor leaned toward the dismissed clerk. We do not need the declaration. Without it, how will you prove what happened? By making Ashcombe prove that he has already seen it. She asked for the final hearing to be moved from the committee room to the full parliamentary chamber, where every statement would be recorded and every piece of evidence displayed. At noon, she would give Ashcombe one last opportunity to describe the document he claimed had never existed and force him to tell a lie only the thief could know. At noon, she would give Ashcombe one last opportunity to describe the document he claimed had never existed and force him to tell a lie only the thief could know. Before entering the full parliamentary chamber, Eleanor placed Rose in the adjoining witnesses' room. 2 guards, chosen by the Lord Chancellor, stood outside. The farm boy and his family had been placed under protection. The former maid had also been found alive. Ashcombe did not know that yet. When Eleanor entered the chamber, every bench was occupied. Ashcombe attacked first. Lady Blackmere forged a baptism, manipulated servants, burned 2 buildings, abducted a tenant's son, and exploited her husband's remorse. He raised the charred knife handle. This was found in her cloak. Eleanor stood. Who found it? One of my agents. At what time? Shortly after midnight. From which pocket? The right pocket. Eleanor placed her burned cloak on the evidence table. It has no right pocket. That entire side was destroyed inside the mill. Ashcombe hesitated. Your agent must have been mistaken. Then the object's custody is uncertain. She asked the examiner to inspect the crack in the handle. Black wax remained trapped between the broken surfaces. If the knife broke during the fire, wax could not exist inside a crack that had not yet opened. The examiner placed a sample of Blackmere parish wax beside it. The parish wax was blue. The wax inside the knife was black. The same black wax used on Ashcombe's private correspondence. Before entering the full chamber, Eleanor secured Rose in the adjoining witnesses' room with the schoolmistress and 2 parliamentary guards selected by the Lord Chancellor, not by Nathaniel or Ashcombe. The farm boy and his family had been placed under parliamentary protection after Nathaniel surrendered one of his unentailed properties to guarantee their tenancy. The former maid had also been found. She had not fled London. Ashcombe's men had confined her inside a rented house near the Northern Road. The dismissed clerk traced the address through the false guardianship order, but Eleanor kept the rescue secret. Ashcombe still believed the maid could never contradict her forged statement. Eleanor prepared 3 copies of every surviving record and placed them under separate seals. When the chamber doors opened, the benches were crowded with lords, clerks, political observers, and members of the Blackmere household. Ashcombe attacked first. He described Eleanor as an intelligent but desperate woman who had falsified a baptism, manipulated servants, burned 2 buildings, abducted a tenant's son, and exploited Nathaniel's remorse. He displayed the charred knife handle and claimed it had been found inside Eleanor's pocket after the mill fire. She destroyed the original register because no lawful record named the Duke as Rose's father, he concluded. Now she asks this chamber to replace evidence with emotion. Eleanor rose without looking toward Nathaniel. Who recovered the knife handle? Ashcombe named one of his agents. At what time? Shortly after midnight. From which pocket? The right pocket of her travelling cloak. Eleanor held up the borrowed dark gown she had worn that morning. My cloak burned inside St. Aula's mill. 3 harbour officers saw me emerge without it. Ashcombe replied that his agent might have mistaken where the object was found. Then the handle's location is uncertain. Its location changes nothing. It changes the custody of the object upon which your accusation depends. She asked the clerk to display the surviving blade. Its broken edge matched the shape of the handle, but Eleanor did not claim that the fit proved ownership. Instead, she directed attention to the wax trapped inside the fracture. Lord Ashcombe says the knife broke, while the clerk carried it from the mill. If so, no wax could exist between surfaces that had not yet separated. The chamber examiner warmed a needle and lifted a fragment from the crack. Ashcombe dismissed it as residue from Blackmere's archive seals. Eleanor placed a known piece of parish wax beside it. The parish sample was deep blue. The wax inside the handle was black. What colour wax do you use for private correspondence, Lord Ashcombe? He hesitated. Many gentlemen use black. Do you? Occasionally. Eleanor produced the envelope, recovered near the grain carriage. Its 3-star impression had been made in black wax. The patterns matched in colour and composition, though not yet conclusively enough to convict him. Ashcombe laughed. You have proved that wax touches knives. I have proved that you presented a false history for this one. She moved next to the physician's statement. Nathaniel confirmed under oath that Ashcombe had summarized it before asking him to sign. Eleanor read the date aloud and established that the examination occurred nearly 2 years after Rose's conception. Did you explain that limitation to the Duke? The physician said the condition was permanent. Where does his report say that? Ashcombe searched the page. It did not. Eleanor then displayed the 2 baptism extracts. One placed the ceremony inside Blackmere Chapel on May 18th. The other claimed Eleanor altered the register there on May 20th. Repair invoices from the bell tower had burned, but the parliamentary newspapers from that week survived. Each reported that services were moved after lightning damaged Blackmere Chapel on May 17th. A printed notice listed the West Schoolroom as the temporary place of worship. Your forger knew the handwriting, Eleanor said. He did not know the building was closed. Ashcombe argued that a private baptism might still have occurred inside the damaged chapel. Eleanor agreed. Yes, but your witness claims a public clerk observed me altering the register at his desk. That desk had been crushed beneath fallen masonry. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Ashcombe changed direction and accused Eleanor of inventing the Wycliffe Trust to steal property from the Duke. Eleanor called the harbour master, who presented the false grain manifest and confirmed that Ashcombe had attempted to export Rose's harvest under authority obtained through the guardianship order. The farm boy then described carrying a flat leather case from Wycliffe House to the Mercy Bell and later to St. Aula's Mill. Ashcombe attacked the child as frightened and unreliable. He could not possibly know what the case contained. I never said he did, Eleanor replied. But you appear anxious to tell us. The trap began to close. Eleanor asked Ashcombe when he first learned of a document hidden inside the portrait frame. There was no document. Then why was the frame removed while the portrait was left behind? Lady Blackmere removed it. Why would I take the frame and abandon the proof hidden inside it? Because there was no proof. Only another forged declaration, bearing the Countess's 3-star seal. The chamber became perfectly still. Eleanor had never publicly described the missing parchment as a declaration. The farm boy had called it folded paper. Nathaniel had mentioned his signature, but not the seal's position. The clerk's mill notes remained locked under parliamentary custody. Eleanor stepped closer. You say the document never existed, yet you know it was a declaration, that it was forged, and that it bore the Countess's 3-star seal. Ashcombe's eyes flicked toward the evidence table. Anyone could infer that from the ribbon. Could they also infer where Nathaniel's signature appeared? At the bottom, beneath the acknowledgement, where such a signature would naturally be placed. A ripple of shock moved across the lords. Eleanor had not asked where it was. Nathaniel rose only to authenticate his own memory. My signature stood on the left side, beneath the acknowledgement. The Countess signed opposite me. He sat again, leaving the decisive reasoning to Eleanor. Ashcombe realized too late that he had described the arrangement of a document he claimed never to have seen. He attempted to withdraw his answer, insisting Nathaniel must have told him years earlier. Eleanor called the former maid into the chamber. Ashcombe's composure finally broke. The woman testified that his agents had forced her to sign a blank page before imprisoning her. She identified the men who removed the archive trunk and confirmed that Ashcombe had supplied the false livery. Still, Eleanor had one final step. Testimony proved coercion. Impossible knowledge connected Ashcombe to the parchment. The black wax connected him to the altered objects. But Parliament needed authentication that the 3-star seal belonged to the Countess and existed before the dispute began. Eleanor placed Rose's baptism ribbon beneath the chamber lamp. Inside its embroidery, beside the torn message, was a detail everyone had mistaken for decoration. 3 silver stars, each stitched around a different coloured thread. She asked the examiner to bring the Countess's sealed trust correspondence from Parliament's own records. As he aligned the ribbon with the old seal, the entire chamber leaned forward. His glass stopped over the centre star, and his face changed. His glass stopped over the centre star, and his face changed. The stitches contain impressions, the examiner said. He carefully loosened the silver thread and exposed 3 tiny wax discs sewn between the layers. Each carried a different section of the Countess of Wycliffe's private seal. When placed together, they formed the complete 3-star design preserved on her trust correspondence 6 years earlier. The ribbon was not merely a keepsake. It had been created as a safeguard, allowing the Countess's seal to be authenticated even if her papers were destroyed. The examiner compared the hidden impressions with the black wax taken from Ashcombe's envelope and the knife handle. The Countess's authentic stars were narrow and uneven, their points carved by hand. Ashcombe's copied seal had smooth, identical points. The black seal is counterfeit, the examiner declared. Ashcombe stepped back from the table. Eleanor unfolded the torn message. The ribbon was opened because someone knew these impressions were hidden inside it, but the person who resewed it found only the warning and failed to look beneath the silver stars. She joined the surviving pieces. The missing end remained unreadable, yet the opening now had meaning. If Blackmere denies this child, Eleanor placed the ribbon beside the Countess's old correspondence. The Countess knew someone might challenge Rose's identity, she said. She placed 3 copies of her seal inside this ribbon. The examiner aligned the impressions. They are authentic. Ashcombe stepped back. Eleanor turned toward the Lords. Rose's trust owned Wycliffe House, 2 farms, the parish school, and an investment in the Mercy Bell. She placed Ashcombe's debt records on the table. Lord Ashcombe had borrowed against those properties without authority. That is a lie, he said. Then explain why Rose had to be declared illegitimate before the Trust's annual review. Ashcombe said nothing. Eleanor displayed the physician's report. He took a medical examination, performed 2 years after Rose's conception, and presented it as proof that the Duke could never have fathered her. She lifted the false baptism extracts. He forged these records, but placed both events inside a chapel that had already been closed by lightning damage. The former maid entered the chamber. Ashcombe's face lost its colour. He supplied the false uniforms, she testified. His men emptied the archive before setting the fire. The farm boy identified the same men from the Mercy Bell and St. Aula's Mill. One of them attempted to leave. Parliamentary guards stopped him at the door. Nathaniel stared at the documents bearing his signature. Eleanor faced him. Ashcombe created the scheme, but he could not have carried it out alone. She pointed to the archive order. You gave him the records. Then to the guardianship order. You gave him Rose. Finally, she placed the physician's report before him. And before doing either, you chose not to read the evidence. Nathaniel lowered his head. Every disaster had passed through a door the Duke himself opened. You cannot prove I ordered the fires, Ashcombe said. The former maid identified the 2 agents seated behind him. The farm boy identified the same men from the ship and mill. One attempted to leave the chamber, but parliamentary guards stopped him. Faced with charges of kidnapping and attempted murder, the younger agents surrendered Ashcombe's written instructions. They ordered the destruction of the archive, the removal of Rose, and the transfer of the Wycliffe assets before noon. The Lord Chancellor directed that Ashcombe be detained for forgery, arson, unlawful confinement, conspiracy to steal trust property, and endangering 2 children. His political sponsors withdrew their protection before he reached the doors. His private estate was placed under attachment to repay the tenants whose grain he had attempted to steal. The physician who supplied the misleading report was referred for prosecution, while the men who set the fires were taken into custody. The chamber did not celebrate. It moved through disbelief, shame, and finally recognition as every charge against Eleanor collapsed. The false baptism extracts were struck from the record. Rose was formally recognized as Nathaniel's lawful daughter, and the Wycliffe Trust was restored under independent trustees, selected by Eleanor. The school, farms, house, and shipping investment could no longer be controlled by the Duke or any male relative without her written consent. The Lord Chancellor then asked Nathaniel to address the damage done under his name. He stood in the same place where he had denied Rose. My wife did not deceive me, he said. My daughter's birth was never uncertain. I used an accusation I had not examined because it served my vanity. Lady Blackmere warned me, and I punished her for making the truth inconvenient. Rose was endangered, not because I lacked evidence, but because I lacked courage. He withdrew his request for the ministry, surrendered his parliamentary committee positions, and accepted formal censure for abusing the guardianship process. He transferred Blackmere House's unentailed income into a separate maintenance settlement for Eleanor and restored every servant dismissed under Ashcombe's authority. He also signed a public correction for distribution to every parish and newspaper that had printed the accusation. None of it purchased forgiveness. Outside the chamber, Nathaniel approached Rose, but stopped several feet away. May I speak to you? Rose looked at Eleanor before answering. You may say it from there. His face tightened with grief. You are my daughter. You always were. I lied because I cared more about what powerful men could give me than what I owed you. Rose held the repaired ribbon in both hands. Will you lie again? I do not know how to promise you that I will never fail. I can promise that you will never again be forced to trust me before I have earned it. Eleanor heard the difference between remorse and entitlement. It did not restore their marriage, but it allowed truth to stand where excuses had lived. She informed Nathaniel that she and Rose would reside at Wycliffe House under a formal separation and separate maintenance agreement. He would see Rose only when the child wished it, and under conditions Eleanor approved. Nathaniel accepted without bargaining. Months later, Wycliffe House reopened. The restored farm supplied the parish school. The Mercy Bell returned under a new captain, and the young maid became keeper of the trust records. Eleanor established 3 copies of every important document in separate locations. No single key, fire, husband, or powerful relative could erase Rose's future again. Nathaniel wrote each week, but received no promise of reconciliation. Sometimes, Rose answered. Eleanor did not. On the first anniversary of the parliamentary hearing, mother and daughter stood before the schoolchildren at Wycliffe House. Rose wore the blue baptism ribbon around her wrist once more. Its silver stars repaired, but its broken clasp left visible. Nathaniel watched from beyond the garden gate, invited only as a witness. A year earlier, he had stepped on that ribbon, while Eleanor stood powerless before him. Now Eleanor knelt, tied it securely around her daughter's wrist, and placed the trust's first official key in Rose's open hand. "This belongs to you," Eleanor said. Rose closed her fingers around it. Then, together, they walked into the house that no one could ever take from them again.